Hello, welcome to the Mythology Manifest. For today's video, I am going to be establishing the origin and evolution of Medusa and the Gorgons as a collective, as they have gone from being terrifying protectors to monsters and finally to weak, beautiful women who are demonised in order to make the gods look bad. I hope you enjoy it. So, just before I begin, I want you to think of a Gorgon. What does it look like in your mind? I'll just give you a second to do that. Okay, let me guess. The majority of you thought of a beautiful looking woman with snakes for hair. If you did, I would like you to forget that, as I am going to take you back to the beginning, and let's see if your opinion changes. So, the first mention of anything close to a Gorgon is actually the three snake-haired women from the underworld, who punish people for what they did in life. Their names were Alecto, Megara, and Tisphene, and they were collectively known as the Irenes, or more commonly, the Furies, who, according to the father of tragedies Aeschylus in the Orestia and Virgil in the Aeneid, had snakes everywhere, including on their torso, but more importantly, in their hair. The idea of the Gorgons having snakes for hair was not used for a long time, even when the first Gorgon was mentioned. The first Gorgon was known as the Elder Gorgon, and was sometimes viewed as Medusa's father, but that was quite a rare belief. In other mentions of the first Gorgon, it is instead the daughter of Helios, whose name was Gorgo, and she was eventually killed by Zeus during the Titanomachy. I say she, but it is not really clear what gender the first Gorgon was, as they were depicted as incredibly ugly, with tusks, beards, and curly hair. This curly hair could perhaps be why the legend of the Gorgon came to have snakes for hair. Before Medusa, the bearded Gorgon was seen as a protector, and eventually more of them appeared on vases, paintings, and statues, and these were placed in temples as they became known as the protectors of the oracles. By the time people decided that there was more than one Gorgon, they had transformed. They were now seen as having scaly skin, claws, and bronze wings, and some of them had snakes entwined in their hair. The faces of these terrifying Gorgons were eventually not used just to protect oracles, but also normal people as well, as they were put on amulets and coins known as the Gorgonians, which was a symbol of protection that kept evil away, especially for women. The Gorgon faces were also painted on shelters for women in ancient Greece, to let them know that they would be safe from whatever they were running from in this home. This was ruined later on by myths that made Gorgons less like protectors and more like weak women ruined by the gods. Before Medusa was ever mentioned, we were told of the shield Aegis, which was owned by the goddess Athena in Homer's Iliad during the 8th century BC. This shield had the head of a Gorgon on its front, very similar to the Gorgonian amulets. This was meant to scare whoever opposed the goddess in battle. The way Homer discusses the Gorgons in his epic poem makes it sound as if there was only one of them, which is challenged in later mythology, as is the horrific way in which he describes them, but this is by a Roman poet, not a Greek one like himself. Almost a century after the Iliad mentions them, the Gorgons begin to have more characteristics and have legends built around them. Eventually, Hesiod writes about the Gorgons in their own myth. In this telling, there were three daughters of the primordial sea deities, Phorcys and Ceto. This is the first time in history that they were ever mentioned by name. The eldest was Stheno, which meant mighty. Next was Uriel, or Euryale, however you wish to say it, which meant far-roaming. And the most famous was the youngest, whose name was Medusa, which translates into English as cunning. Medusa was described as mortal by Hesiod, but this doesn't seem to mean that she looked human, but instead that she could be killed, unlike her immortal sisters. All three Gorgons were described in a similar way to the first Gorgons. They had snakes for hair, sharp tusks and claws, and bronze wings. They were hideous and monstrous, but were still used as protective symbols, but also used by parents to get their children to behave. After Hesiod, the Gorgons are not mentioned again until 490 BC, when the poet Pindarus described Medusa, and Medusa alone, with the epithet of fair-cheeked. Over the next century or so, she is made to be more beautiful yet scary in an intimidating way, whilst her sisters are described to look exactly as they did originally, with claws, tusks and wings, except for the fact that they now had not only snakes for hair, but they could turn people into stone with just a look. However, this eventually changed so that only Medusa had this gift. After Homer, Hesiod and Pindarus wrote about Medusa, the next one to write and dramatise her was Ovid in his book Metamorphosis, in the 8th century AD. In this book, he discussed many myths, but one of the most popular was the legend of Medusa, and also the legend of Arachne, which I will be discussing in another video when I do Roman mythology. Ovid was a Roman himself, and disliked some of the gods, including Athena and Ares, to him, Minerva and Mars. So he used his writing to portray them as negatively as possible. In his telling of the story of Medusa, Ovid had Medusa be a completely mortal human-looking woman, with no link to her sisters whatsoever. She was described as incredibly beautiful by the poet, and because of this she caught the eye of the god of the sea, Poseidon, or as Ovid knew him, Neptune. He attempted to seduce Medusa, but she refused, and so Poseidon attacked her. The attack happened inside a temple dedicated to Athena, and the goddess was enraged as she viewed it as them defiling her temple. Instead of trying to punish the guilty Poseidon for his crime, Athena punished the innocent Medusa by giving her snakes for hair and a gaze that would turn any man into stone. Medusa was also cast into exile, where she found Stheno and Uriel in a cave, and they welcomed her as a sister. Ovid did this to show the gods, especially Athena, as harsh and uncaring for mortals, as well as incredibly unjust. Something that, if he was in Greek times, would have been incredibly brave for him to do. But because he was a Roman, he had nothing to fear, as many didn't like Athena, or to them Minerva, already. This challenged everything the Greeks had already established about Athena, who was probably the most level-headed in all of the pantheon. Not liking Ovid's ending to this myth, the Greeks adapted it to suit their own views on Athena. They said that Athena had transformed Medusa into a Gorgon so that she could protect herself from men, not out of anger and jealousy, and that Medusa went into hiding so that she wouldn't accidentally hurt anyone. Bear in mind this, according to the Greeks' version of the legend, Medusa was attacked by Poseidon, who got her pregnant. When Athena cursed her as protection, it stopped the pregnancy. So, Medusa ran her entire life away from men who wanted to kill her just for her appearance, whilst heavily pregnant, when all she was trying to do was hide so that she wouldn't hurt anyone, and yet she is still viewed as the monster of these stories. In another version of the myth, Medusa did lay with Poseidon, but this time she did it willingly for personal gain and also to insult Athena in her own temple. So, the goddess had a right to be angry about it in this telling of the story, and punished Medusa for that by making her a Gorgon. In other myths, both Greek and Roman, Medusa compared her beauty to Athena's and claimed that she herself was far more beautiful than the goddess. And as is the case in most myths, the god did not like to be compared to mortals, and so Athena did transform her into a Gorgon as punishment. My preferred telling of the myth is the Greek one, where Athena transformed Medusa to protect her, because I don't think Medusa was the villain in that story. I think she was the victim. Let me know which version of the myth you prefer, either in the comments or on Twitter, which I have left a link to in the description below. I will be discussing the legend of Perseus and Medusa in my next video, now that you have background knowledge on how Medusa became such a legendary character. Also, let me know in the comments if your opinion has changed on Medusa. How do you think she would look now? If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment or subscribe. Thank you for helping me keep classics alive. I will see you next time on the Mythology Manifest.